If you've ever built something you were truly proud of, something you poured your soul into, you know the feeling. It could be a company, a family, a bookshelf you made with your own two hands. For me, it was a document, a prenuptial agreement. And for a long time that document and my marriage were the twin pillars of my life, structures I believed to be indestructible. My name is Elliot, and I am, or at least I was, one of the top divorce lawyers in the city. I've made my name navigating the ruins of other people's lives. I've seen love curdle into a hatred so potent it could strip paint. I've witnessed betrayals that would make a novelist blush at their lack of imagination. I've sat across from weeping spouses and furious husbands, listening to tales of secret families, emptied bank accounts, and breathtaking cruelty. I've always maintained a professional distance, a kind of emotional armor. I treated each case like a complex puzzle, a knot to be untangled with logic and law, not emotion. I thought I was immune. I thought, after seeing the absolute worst of human nature day in and day out, that nothing could ever truly surprise me. Then came this morning. The light was just starting to filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, the one overlooking the park. I remember the smell of the espresso machine, a comforting, familiar ritual. Genevieve was already dressed, standing by the kitchen island. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of cream and a pencil skirt that meant business. She looked, as always, impossibly elegant. For 12 years, that sight had been the best part of my day. But this morning, her posture was different. Rigid. Her smile, usually the slow, warm dawn of my morning, was a thin, tight line. She slid a thick manila envelope across the polished marble countertop. It made a dry, whispery sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. I looked at it, then at her. My name was on it, typed in a crisp, unfamiliar font. "What is this?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. "I think you know, Elliot," she said. Her tone was unnervingly calm. A placid lake over a chasm. She didn't look at me. She was looking just past me, at the city skyline, as if I were already a part of her past. My fingers felt numb as I opened the envelope. The paper inside was thick, expensive. The letterhead at the top made my stomach clench into a knot of ice. It was the logo of Marcus Thorne, my biggest rival. A man whose entire career was built on loud, brutish, scorched earth litigation. He was a legal sledgehammer. I was a scalpel. We despised each other with a professional passion that was the stuff of legend in the city's legal circles. And below his name, the words swam into focus: petition for dissolution of marriage. I read on, my blood running colder with every line. She was demanding everything. The penthouse. The vacation home in the wine country. The entirety of our joint investment portfolio, which I had painstakingly built over the last decade. And the final, audacious blow, half of all my future earnings. For life. It was a declaration of war. A fantasy. A list of demands so ludicrous, so completely untethered from reality, that my first instinct was to laugh. But then I saw the attached motion. A motion to invalidate our prenuptial agreement. It cited a litany of supposed loopholes, procedural errors, and claims of emotional duress. It was a work of fiction, a clumsy, brutish attempt by Thorne to hammer away at my life's foundations. I finally looked up at her. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a world with, was a stranger. Her face was a beautiful, impassive mask. She was treating me like one of her husband's clients. No, worse. She was treating me like the enemy. "Genevieve, what is this?" I asked again. My voice barely a whisper. "This is insane." "You know it is. Marcus thinks we have a very strong case," she said, still avoiding my eyes. "He says the prenup is fundamentally unfair. Coercive." And then I did laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was a dry, hollow, broken sound. What she had forgotten, what Marcus Thorne, in his arrogant rush, had clearly failed to grasp, was the nature of our prenup. It wasn't some boilerplate document we'd downloaded and signed in a hurry. It wasn't a standard agreement drafted by a third-party firm. Our prenup was my masterpiece. It was the final project for my advanced contract law seminar at Harvard Law School, taught by the legendary Professor Caldwell, a man who viewed contract law as a form of high art. It was a document I'd spent an entire semester perfecting, a theoretical exercise in creating a contract so layered, so complex, so mutually binding, and yet so utterly ironclad that it was impervious to any attack. It had earned me the highest grade in the class and a personal commendation from Caldwell himself. He'd called it a beautiful, terrifying thing. For the last decade, with my name redacted, of course it has been used as a teaching example at the law school. The case study is literally called the Unbreakable Agreement. And this morning, my wife, with my most hated rival at her side, had just declared her intention to break it. She thought she'd found a loophole. What she didn't realize was that she hadn't just stepped into a trap. She'd stepped into a fortress I had designed myself, and I had just locked the gates behind her. It wasn't about revenge in that moment. It was about survival. But standing there in my sun-drenched kitchen, with the ruins of my marriage laid out on the counter between us, I knew one thing with chilling certainty: it was about to be. The first few hours after she left were a blur. I remember standing in the kitchen for what felt like an eternity, the legal papers still in my hand, the ghost of her expensive perfume hanging in the air. The silence in the penthouse was no longer peaceful, it was cavernous, oppressive. Every tick of the clock on the wall sounded like a hammer blow. I walked through the rooms we had designed together, my hand trailing over the cool leather of the sofa we'd picked out, my eyes catching on the photograph on the mantelpiece. It was from our trip to Tuscany, 5 years ago. We were standing in a vineyard, laughing, the sun in our eyes. Genevieve's head was thrown back in a genuine, uninhibited laugh, the kind I hadn't seen in a long time. Was this all a lie? Had I been sharing my life with a phantom, a performance? As a divorce lawyer, I was supposed to be the expert in this. I was the one who guided people through the storm. I'd always tell my clients, the first 24 hours are the worst. Your body is in shock. Don't make any decisions, just breathe. Now I was the client, and I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, a band of steel squeezing my lungs. My professional armor had been shattered, and all the raw, messy human emotions I'd learned to compartmentalize came flooding in. Grief. Rage. A profound, bottomless sense of betrayal that felt like a physical wound. I sank onto the sofa, the one we chose together, and I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I put my head in my hands, and I wept. I wept for the man in the photograph. The man who believed in that shared laughter. I wept for the future I had meticulously planned, a future that had just been erased. When the tears finally subsided, they were replaced by something else. A cold, quiet clarity. The shock was wearing off, and the lawyer in me was starting to wake up. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of pain, began to sort, to analyze, to process. I laid the documents out on the large oak dining table. I read every word of Thorne's motion. It was aggressive, full of bluster and baseless accusations. He claimed I had used my superior legal knowledge to coerce Genevieve into signing. He claimed the terms were unconscionable. He claimed there were procedural flaws in the execution of the document. It was a standard, brute force attack, throwing everything at the wall to see what might stick. It was Marcus Thorne's signature move: create enough chaos and noise to intimidate the other side into a quick, unfavorable settlement. He was counting on my emotional distress. He was counting on me being just another heartbroken husband, too distraught to fight back effectively. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had mistaken my love for Genevieve for weakness. My mind started to drift back, searching for the breadcrumbs, the warning signs I must have missed. Our life together hadn't been a fairy tale. No marriage is, but I thought it was strong. Genevieve was an art consultant for wealthy collectors. She was ambitious, intelligent, and moved through the city's elite social circles with an elegance that always left me a little in awe. I was proud of her. I supported her career, celebrated her successes. We were a power couple. Or so I thought. We had everything we'd ever wanted. Or rather, everything I thought we wanted. I remembered a conversation from about 6 months ago. We were at a charity gala. Genevieve was talking about one of her clients, a tech billionaire's ex-wife who had just secured a massive settlement, one without a prenup. I remember Genevieve saying something like, "She's set for life. She never has to work again." I'd dismissed it at the time as an idle comment, a throwaway line. Now it echoed in my mind with sinister significance. Then there were the dinners with Marcus Thorne. They'd happened a few times over the past year, always at functions we were both obligated to attend. I'd always found him odious, a preening peacock of a man, but Genevieve seemed amused by him. She'd laugh at his jokes, which were never funny. She'd engage him in conversation while I stood by, my jaw tight. "He's not so bad, Elliot," she'd say, on the way home. "You're just too competitive." Was this when it started? Was she sizing up my rival, my enemy, as her potential champion? The thought was nauseating. It was like finding out your partner had been secretly meeting with an arms dealer to discuss the logistics of your own assassination. And then the most painful memory of all, our 10th anniversary. I had planned a surprise trip to Paris, recreating our honeymoon. I had the tickets, the hotel booked, everything. The night before we were supposed to leave, she told me she couldn't go. She had a last-minute, can't-miss opportunity to network with a potential client in Hong Kong. She said it was for us, for our future. I remembered the disappointment, the argument that followed. I had accused her of prioritizing her work over our marriage. She had accused me of not supporting her ambitions. We didn't go to Paris. She went to Hong Kong. I stayed home, feeling like a fool. I see it now. The little betrayals, the slow erosion of trust, the subtle shifts in priority. I had explained them away, made excuses for her, for us. I had wanted to believe in the story we were telling ourselves. I had refused to see the cracks forming in the foundation. The catalyst, the moment that finally snapped me out of my grief and into action, came late that afternoon. An email landed in my inbox. It was from Marcus Thorne. The subject line was simply, "Initial settlement offer." It wasn't a formal legal document. It was a direct email, a power play. He bypassed my office, my assistant, everything. He was trying to get under my skin. The email was condescending, arrogant, and dripping with false sympathy. "Elliot," it began, "I'm writing to you directly, lawyer to lawyer, in the hopes that we can resolve this matter amicably and spare Genevieve any further distress. She is, as you can imagine, quite distraught. Given your unique position in this, I'm prepared to offer a walkaway settlement that is frankly far more generous than you deserve. We will accept the house, the investment portfolio, and a one-time lump sum payment of $10 million. In return, we will graciously waive the claim on your future earnings. I urge you to consider this offer seriously. Taking this to court will be a long, messy, and professionally embarrassing affair for you. This is your chance to walk away with your dignity, if not your fortune, intact." Reading that email, something inside me shifted. The grief, the sadness, it didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It hardened into something cold, dense, and powerful. It became resolve. He called my position unique. He had no idea. He thought he was cornering a wounded animal. He didn't realize he was poking a sleeping dragon. The condescension, the transparent attempt at intimidation, the sheer audacity of it. It was the slap in the face I needed. It cleared my head completely. The pain was still there, a low, throbbing ache deep in my chest, but it was no longer in control. My mind was sharp again. The emotional storm had passed, and in its wake there was a dead calm. I stood up from the dining table, walked over to my home office, and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. It was a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Inside, beneath old case files and law school textbooks, was a single, leather-bound document. It was heavy in my hands, the leather still supple, the embossed gold lettering on the cover still sharp. It didn't have a title. It just had our initials. EM and GL. I placed it on my desk, opened it to the first page, and began to read. The font was familiar. It was my own. The words were my own. And as I read, I began to remember the intricate, beautiful, and terrifying machine I had built all those years ago. The emotional fog was gone. The time for grieving was over. The war had been declared, and I was finally ready to plan my defense. No, not a defense. A counterattack. It wasn't about revenge, until he sent that email. Now it was. My office became my sanctuary, my war room. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of our shared success, now felt like enemy territory. I spent the next 2 days holed up in that leather and mahogany fortress, the city lights twinkling beyond the window like a distant, unconcerned galaxy. I had the leather-bound Prenup open on my desk, its pages filled with my own precise, almost microscopic handwriting from my law school days. I had told Genevieve back then, half joking, that I was building us a legal fortress to protect our future. She had laughed and called me a nerd. She had no idea how true it was. A fortress can be used to keep invaders out, but it can also be used to keep someone in. This wasn't just a document, it was a piece of architecture. Every clause was a load-bearing wall, every subsection an interlocking gear. Professor Caldwell had taught us that a contract isn't just a list of rules, it's a story you write about the future. It anticipates conflict and designs a path through it. My younger self, full of academic pride and a touch of arrogance, had anticipated every conceivable conflict. Infidelity, professional ruin, criminal conviction, and most importantly, bad faith litigation. As I reread my own work, I felt a grim sense of pride. It was brilliant. It was also, I now realized, a little monstrous. It was the work of a young man obsessed with logic and foresight. A man who hadn't yet learned that some things in life, like love and trust, are supposed to exist outside the confines of a contract. But that man was gone, replaced by the one sitting here now, and he was profoundly grateful for his younger self's paranoia. The document was built around a series of cascading clauses. Think of it like a row of dominoes. Thorne and Genevieve were focused on the first domino, the division of assets. They thought they could knock it over by claiming duress or unconscionability, but they hadn't seen the rest of the chain. Tipping that first domino would trigger a second, and a third, each one more devastating than the last. The first key was Clause 17, Section B, the Professional Conduct Clause. I had written it with the cutthroat world of high-stakes law in mind. It stipulated that in the event of a marital dissolution, both parties agreed to conduct themselves in a manner that would not intentionally harm the other's professional reputation or standing in the community. It was a fairly standard morality clause, but with a twist. My twist. Section B. The part I was sure Thorne had missed in his haste, defined professional harm, not just as libel or slander, but as engaging in frivolous, vexatious, or bad faith litigation, designed to extract a settlement disproportionate to the established marital assets. The penalty for violating this clause wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was a complete forfeiture of any and all claims to spousal support and future earnings. Genevieve's ridiculous demand for half my future income wasn't just an opening salvo, it was a self-destruct button. She had already breached the contract. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was Clause 24, the hostile engagement clause. This was my pride and joy. It was an entirely novel creation, the part that had made Professor Caldwell raise an eyebrow and smile. It stated that because our professional lives were so intertwined with the city's legal and social elite, a dissolution of the marriage required a special duty of care. Therefore, if one party initiated divorce proceedings, they were expressly forbidden from retaining legal counsel from a list of direct professional competitors attached as Schedule C. The purpose, as stated in the text, was to prevent the weaponization of privileged marital information for professional gain and to ensure a dispassionate and equitable resolution. On Schedule C, at the very top of the list of 5 names, was Marcus Thorne. The penalty for breaching Clause 24 was even more severe. It triggered a liquidated damages provision, a pre-agreed financial penalty for the harm caused by the breach. I had set that penalty at 150% of the total value of all marital assets. In other words, by hiring Marcus Thorne, Genevieve hadn't just voided her own claims, she now contractually owed me money. A lot of it. It was a labyrinth of my own design, and she was lost inside it, holding hands with the one person on earth guaranteed to lead her to a dead end. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I was too close to it. A man who represents himself has a fool for a client, and my judgment was clouded by a decade of love and a mountain of pain. I needed a clear-headed ally. My first thought was to call Professor Caldwell, but he was long retired, and I didn't want to burden him. I needed someone sharp, loyal, and who saw me as a lawyer, not as a heartbroken husband. My mind went to Ben Carter. Ben was a junior associate at my firm, a brilliant kid I'd personally recruited out of Columbia. He was sharp as a tack, relentlessly hard-working, and had a kind of wide-eyed idealism about the law that I found both refreshing and a little sad. He reminded me of myself, 20 years ago. He looked up to me, and I knew I could trust him implicitly. I called him on his personal cell phone late on the second night. "Ben," I said, "I need your help with a personal matter. It's sensitive. Can you come to my apartment? And Ben, come alone. Don't mention this to anyone." An hour later, he was sitting in the chair opposite my desk, looking concerned. I'd poured him a glass of whiskey, which he held but didn't drink. I slid the thick manila envelope from Thorne's firm across the desk. "My wife is divorcing me," I said, the words tasting like ash. Ben's eyes widened. He read the first page and winced. "Mr. Morgan, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, Ben. Be my lawyer." For the next hour, I walked him through it. I didn't give him the emotional backstory, just the facts. Then I handed him my own leather-bound copy of the prenup. He took it with a kind of reverence. He began to read, and I watched his face. The initial look of sympathy for his boss transformed into the focused, intense expression of a lawyer deep in a complex problem. He was silent for a long time, his eyes scanning the pages. Occasionally, he would let out a low whistle. He went back and forth between Thorne's motion and my prenup, cross-referencing, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, he looked up, his eyes shining with a mixture of shock and sheer unadulterated awe. "Mr. Morgan," he began, his voice barely a whisper. This is a work of art. I've never seen anything like it. Clause 24, the hostile engagement clause. Is this even enforceable? It's novel, I admitted. But the legal theory is sound. The language is precise. The justification is clearly articulated, and most importantly, she signed it. We both did, with separate legal counsel present, as stipulated in Clause 31. Ben shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "They have no idea, do they? Thorne and her. They think they're fighting a normal battle. They're playing checkers, and you've built a three-dimensional chessboard." "Exactly," I said. "And they just made a series of catastrophic moves." Ben's presence was a balm. His professional admiration for the document validated the part of me that was a lawyer, the part that needed to take back control. He was my first ally, the first person to see the situation not as a tragedy, but as a legal problem with a clear, albeit ruthless, solution. We spent the rest of the night strategizing. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about contractual obligations, breach, and remedies. We spoke the cold, clean language of the law. The plan we formulated was one of deliberate, patient escalation. We wouldn't fire back with emotion of our own. That was what Thorne wanted, a messy public fight. No, my first move would be much quieter, much more precise. It would be a simple letter, but it would be a letter that would detonate a bomb in the middle of their strategy, and they would never see it coming. My hidden leverage wasn't just the contract itself, it was their ignorance of it. They thought they were holding a stick of dynamite, ready to blow up my life. They didn't realize they were holding it inside a reinforced steel chamber of my own design, and I was about to lock the door. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the offensive, quietly. Our first move was not a cannonball but a poison dart. It was silent, precise, and aimed at a nerve center they didn't even know was exposed. Marcus Thorne was expecting a fight in the courtroom. He was gearing up for motions, depositions, a public spectacle where he could grandstand and posture. He wanted to drag me through the mud. I was going to deny him the pleasure. My battlefield was not the court of public opinion, but the quiet, sterile world of contract enforcement and fiduciary duty. Ben and I drafted the letter the next morning. It wasn't addressed to Thorne or to Genevieve. It was addressed to the 5 other members of the board of the City Arts Foundation, one of the most prestigious philanthropic organizations in the city. Genevieve and I had been co-chairs of their annual fundraising gala for the past 3 years. It was her crowning social achievement, the centerpiece of her public persona as a patron of the arts. She loved the power and prestige it gave her. The letter was simple, formal, and devastating. It read, "Dear members of the board, it is with regret that I must inform you of a personal matter that has professional implications for the foundation. My wife, Genevieve Morgan, has initiated divorce proceedings. As you know, we serve as co-chairs for the upcoming gala. Unfortunately, this creates an untenable conflict of interest. Furthermore, pursuant to our binding prenuptial agreement, specifically Clause 19, joint public and fiduciary appointments, in the event of a marital dissolution, any and all joint appointments to charitable, corporate, or community boards must be vacated by one party to avoid conflicts. The clause grants the party with the longer-standing history of financial contribution to the organization the right to remain. As per the Foundation's records, my initial contributions predate Genevieve's involvement by 4 years. Therefore, effective immediately, Genevieve Morgan is contractually obligated to tender her resignation from the board. I have attached the relevant section of the agreement for your review. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause, and look forward to continuing my work with the Foundation. It was perfect. It wasn't an accusation, it was a notification of a contractual obligation. I wasn't kicking her off the board. Our own agreement was I was merely the messenger. We sent it via courier to each board member's private office, ensuring it would bypass any assistance. We sent a courtesy copy to Marcus Thorne's office at the exact same time. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Thorne, I'm sure, would have needed a few hours to even locate Clause 19 in the dense document. But the board members, powerful and risk-averse people, would have understood its implications instantly. A potential legal dispute involving their foundation, a whiff of scandal. They would want to distance themselves from it as quickly as possible. The first call came 3 hours later. It was from Genevieve. Her number flashed on my screen, and I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. I ignored it. Then a text message appeared. "Elliot, what have you done? Call me now." I saved the message and did not reply. Then came a flood of texts, each more frantic than the last. "They're calling an emergency board meeting. You can't do this to me. This is my life's work. You are trying to ruin me. This is cruel. Pick up the phone, you coward." I read each message with a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a chemical reaction I had initiated from behind protective glass. Her pain, her panic, it was a data point, evidence of a successful first strike. I felt a pang of something, maybe the ghost of my old affection for her, but it was quickly suppressed by the cold, hard logic of my new reality. She had chosen this path. She had chosen Thorne. She had chosen war. Cruelty was her demanding half my future earnings after trying to break a sacred promise. This was just consequences. An hour later, an official, panicked-sounding email arrived from Marcus Thorne. It had lost all of its earlier condescension. The tone was now sharp, accusatory. "Mr. Morgan, your extrajudicial communication with the board of the City Arts Foundation is a clear act of intimidation and a flagrant attempt to poison the well. This is highly unethical, and will be brought to the attention of the court. We demand you retract your letter immediately. Your client's interpretation of the prenuptial agreement is self-serving and deeply flawed. We will be filing for an emergency injunction to halt these malicious actions." Ben and I read the email together in my office. Ben was practically vibrating with excitement. "He's rattled," Ben said, grinning. "He's calling it extrajudicial. He doesn't get it. You're not litigating. You're just executing a contract. He has no idea how to fight this. He's threatening an injunction," I said, rereading the line. "He won't get it. There's no irreparable harm to enjoin. The harm is a term of a contract she signed. But let him try. Let him spend Genevieve's money filing motions that are dead on arrival. Let him show the judge just how little he understands the document at the heart of this case." This was the core of my strategy. The silent takeover. I wouldn't fight Thorne on his turf. I wouldn't engage in his mudslinging. I would systematically and quietly enforce the terms of the unbreakable agreement, one clause at a time. Each move would be legally sound, impeccably documented, and designed to dismantle Genevieve's life and Thorne's case, piece by piece, without ever having to raise my voice. The next domino was our finances. We had a number of joint accounts and a shared wealth management portfolio with a private bank. Genevieve had already been attempting to move funds, but my initial call to my banker had put a temporary freeze on everything. Now it was time to formalize it. Ben drafted another letter, this one to the head of our private bank. It cited Clause 17, Section B, the professional conduct clause she had already breached. The letter stated, "Pursuant to the attached prenuptial agreement, A breach of the professional conduct clause has occurred, as evidenced by the attached legal filing which contains bad faith claims regarding future earnings. The penalty for this breach, as stipulated in Section B(I), is the immediate conversion of all joint marital assets into a trust, to be administered by a neutral third party, pending the final resolution of the dissolution. The agreement names my firm's senior partner, Robert Fenwick, as the designated neutral trustee in such an event. Please freeze all assets and await instruction from Mr. Fenwick. We sent it. The effect was like dropping a guillotine. Within an hour, Genevieve's access to our shared fortune was completely severed. Her credit cards, the ones tied to the joint accounts, were declined. Her access to the investment portfolio was blocked. She was cut off, not by me, but by the precise mechanics of the document she was trying to invalidate. Her panic escalated into pure fury. The voicemails she left became unhinged, a torrent of accusations and threats. Thorne sent another sputtering, impotent email, this time threatening to file a complaint with the Bar Association for professional misconduct. It was the desperate flailing of a man who realized he'd walked into a cage, and the door had just slammed shut. He thought he was the hunter, but he was just another piece on my board. And he, along with my wife, were beginning to understand the terrifying, beautiful complexity of the game I had designed. The silence from my end was, I suspect, the most unnerving part for them. They were screaming into a void, and the void was just methodically taking them apart. The concept of a family exodus in a divorce is a painful one. It's the slow, awkward peeling away of people you once considered mutual friends, the choosing of sides, the social calculus, that happens in the wake of a breakup. For Genevieve and me, our family was the intricate web of social and professional connections we had woven over 12 years. It was a world of gallery openings, charity galas, exclusive dinner parties, and weekend trips with other powerful couples. Genevieve thrived in this world. It was her stage, her validation, and it was about to abandon her. My quiet, clinical strikes against her position on the Arts Foundation board, and her access to our joint funds were just the beginning. The real power shift came from the fallout. The news of her forced resignation from the board spread like wildfire through our social circle, but it didn't spread the way she would have wanted. I hadn't leaked a story or spoken to anyone. The board members, however, had. To protect themselves and the foundation, they had to explain her sudden departure. And the story they told was the truth, that Genevieve's own prenuptial agreement, which she was now trying to break, had mandated her removal. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the cruel husband trying to ruin his wife. In their eyes, I was the one being attacked by a greedy spouse who was now facing the consequences of her own contractual agreements. The narrative had flipped completely, without me saying a word. The first sign of the exodus was a phone call from an old friend, a real estate developer named Patrick. We often played golf together. "Elliot," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "I heard what's going on. Just wanted to say, I'm on your side, man. What she's doing, it's unbelievable. Thorne is a shark. Be careful." That call was the first of many. People who had been our couple friends were suddenly just my friends. The invitations that arrived were addressed only to me. "We're having a few people over for drinks on Saturday. Elliot. Love to see you." No mention of Genevieve. She was being quietly, politely, and surgically excised from the social world she cherished. The most painful blow for her, I think, came from the art world itself. Her reputation as a consultant was built on trust and connections. My move to enforce the prenup had painted her as someone who didn't honor her agreements. For her wealthy, conservative clients, that was a cardinal sin. A prominent collector, a woman who had been Genevieve's biggest client and a sort of mentor to her, called me directly. "Elliot, I'm so sorry to hear about this mess," she said. "I've had to suspend my contract with Genevieve for the time being. I can't have my acquisitions tangled up with someone in this kind of legal uncertainty. I hope you understand." I understood perfectly. It was another domino falling, one I hadn't even pushed myself. It was a natural consequence of the instability she and Thorne had created. Her career, which she had claimed was the reason for her emotional distance, for missing our anniversary, was now crumbling as a direct result of her attempt to cash out of our marriage. The irony was so thick, you could taste it. Desperate, Genevieve resorted to counter-manipulation. She tried to play the victim. She started telling people I had been controlling, that I had locked her out of her own money out of spite. She tried to frame my actions as those of a bitter, controlling husband. But it didn't work. The problem for her was that my actions were all text-based. I had the prenup. I had the letters. I had the paper trail. Every move I made was backed by a clause she herself had signed. My defense was impenetrable because it was the truth, codified and notarized. Her desperation reached a new peak when she tried to use our personal memories against me. One evening, a package arrived at my apartment. It was a framed photo of us from our wedding day. There was a note attached, in her elegant, looping handwriting. "Don't you remember this day, Elliot? Don't you remember the man you were? He wouldn't do this to me. He wouldn't be this monster." I looked at the photo for a long time. The young man smiling back at me looked happy, naive, and completely unaware of the future. The note was a masterful piece of emotional manipulation. It was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me doubt my resolve. A few weeks ago, it might have worked. But not now. The man in that photo didn't know his wife would one day hire his nemesis to try and strip him of everything he'd ever worked for. The man in that photo was gone. I took the photo out of the frame, slid it into a drawer, and threw the frame and the note into the trash. The final pathetic attempt at manipulation came through Thorne. He requested a four-way meeting, me, Ben, Genevieve, and him. He framed it as a last chance to de-escalate before things got truly ugly. I knew what it was. It was an ambush. They were losing the quiet war of logistics, so they wanted to force a face-to-face confrontation, a venue where emotion and intimidation could be brought to bear. Ben advised against it. "It's a trap, Mr. Morgan." "I know," I said. "But it's a trap we're going to walk into. Because it's time. It's time to show them the final piece of the puzzle. It's time to end this." The power shift was complete. She was isolated. Her finances were frozen, and her reputation was in tatters. She and Thorne were backed into a corner. I was about to show them that the corner had no exit. The meeting was held in a neutral conference room at a mediation center, a place designed to project calm with its beige walls and bland corporate art. The air, however, was thick with tension. I walked in with Ben at my side. I was calm, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. Genevieve and Marcus Thorne were already there, sitting on the opposite side of a long mahogany table. Genevieve looked pale and drawn, the strain of the past few weeks etched onto her face. She refused to meet my eyes, staring intently at a notepad in front of her. Thorne, on the other hand, tried to project an air of confidence, but it was brittle. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a tight, forced smile. "Elliot," he began, his voice attempting a tone of weary reasonableness. "Thank you for coming. I'm glad we can finally sit down like professionals and sort this out. This has all gotten rather out of hand." I said nothing. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. My silence seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He cleared his throat and continued, gesturing toward Genevieve. "My client has been through a tremendous ordeal. Your actions have been unnecessarily aggressive. Freezing her assets, contacting her board members. It's punitive, Elliot. All she wants is what's fair. We are prepared to be reasonable. We are dropping the claim for future earnings. We simply ask for the penthouse, the investment portfolio, and we can all walk away." It was astounding. After everything, after the clear contractual breaches, he was still pushing the same ridiculous narrative. He was either completely incompetent, or he believed I was a complete fool. I glanced at Ben, who gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The plan was in motion. I still said nothing. I let the silence hang in the air, stretching it until it was taut and uncomfortable. Thorne shifted in his seat. Genevieve finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Elliot, please," she whispered. "Let's just end this." I turned my gaze to her. "I agree," I said, my voice even and low. "Let's end this." I looked at Ben. "Ben, if you would." Ben opened his briefcase and took out a single freshly printed document. He slid a copy across the table to Thorne. It wasn't a motion. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was a formal notice. "What's this?" Thorne asked, snatching it up. He began to read, his brow furrowed. I watched as the color drained from his face. His eyes widened, and his jaw went slack. He looked up from the paper, first at me, then at Genevieve. A look of pure, unadulterated horror dawning in his eyes. Genevieve looked at him, confused. "Marcus, what is it?" He didn't answer her. He just stared at me. "You can't be serious," he stammered. "I am always serious when it comes to contracts, Marcus," I said calmly. "You of all people should know that." Ben spoke, his voice crisp and professional. "As you can see, Mr. Thorne, we have formally invoked Clause 24 of the prenuptial agreement, the hostile engagement clause. As you know, the clause expressly forbids either party from retaining you as legal counsel in a dissolution proceeding. Your retention by Mrs. Morgan constitutes a material breach of the contract." Thorne sputtered. That's an absurd clause. No court would enforce it." "We believe they will," Ben continued, unfazed. "But that's a debate for another day. The more pressing issue for you is Section C of that clause, the liquidated damages provision." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "For the irreparable reputational and professional harm caused by the breach, that is, by you being hired, the agreement stipulates a penalty. A penalty equal to 150% of the total marital assets, payable by the breaching party to the non-breaching party." Genevieve gasped. She finally grabbed the paper from Thorne's trembling hand. She read it, her eyes darting back and forth. The reality of her situation finally crashed down on her. She hadn't just lost her claim to the house and the investments. She now, according to the contract she was trying to break, owed me millions of dollars. But I wasn't finished. That was the trap for her. The next part was the trap for him. "And then there's the matter of your own professional liability, Marcus," I said, speaking directly to him for the first time. My voice was quiet, almost conversational. "You advised your client to pursue a strategy that directly breached a contract you clearly didn't read carefully enough. You exposed her to catastrophic financial penalties. That sounds an awful lot like malpractice to me. I imagine your insurance carrier would be very interested to hear about it. As would the state bar." Thorne looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His career, his reputation, his entire blustering persona was crumbling in a matter of seconds. He had been so focused on attacking me that he never once considered that the weapon he was using was pointed directly at himself. Genevieve finally broke. Tears streamed down her face. "Elliot, no, please. I didn't know. He told me, he said we could win. He said it was just a standard prenup. And you believed him?" I asked, the first hint of real emotion creeping into my voice. "Genevieve, you were there. You were there when I wrote it. You sat with me while I explained the philosophy behind it. You knew what this was. You just forgot who I am." I stood up. Ben stood with me. The meeting was over. "Here is the new reality," I said, my voice hard as steel. "You will instruct your lawyer, your new lawyer, to accept the terms of the prenup as written. You will vacate the penthouse by the end of the month. You will sign every document put in front of you. In return, and only in return, I will graciously decline to enforce the liquidated damages clause. I will not sue you into oblivion, even though this contract gives me every right to do so. And I will not file a formal complaint against Mr. Thorne for malpractice. I am giving you a walk-away deal. You walk away with what you brought into this marriage, which, as we both know, was nothing. And you walk away with your freedom. That is the only deal on the table. It is the only deal that will ever be on the table. You have 24 hours. I looked at Genevieve one last time. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger drowning in the consequences of her own choices. There was no triumph in it, just a profound, aching sadness and the clean, cold finality of the end. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her and her disgraced lawyer to sit in the ruins of the war they had so eagerly declared. It's been 6 months since that day in the conference room. Genevieve, through a new and much more humbled lawyer, accepted my terms within an hour. The divorce was finalized quickly and quietly. She moved out of the penthouse, and I sold it. The space was too full of ghosts. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I bought a smaller place downtown, a modern apartment with a view of the river. It's clean, it's mine, and it holds no memories of a life that no longer exists. I kept my word. I didn't enforce the penalty clause, and I didn't file a complaint against Thorne. His humiliation was punishment enough. His reputation in the legal community took a nosedive. The story of how he'd been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by a contract he'd underestimated became a cautionary tale, whispered in the bars and restaurants where lawyers gather. He lost several major clients, and I hear his firm is struggling. He tried to build his name by destroying mine, and instead, he destroyed his own. Genevieve, from what I hear, is trying to rebuild her life. She's working for a small suburban art gallery. The high-flying world of elite collectors is closed to her now. Our old friends, our old circle, they don't speak of her. It's as if she simply vanished. Sometimes I feel a flicker of pity for her, but it's quickly extinguished by the memory of that manila envelope on the kitchen counter. She made her choice. She gambled everything on the belief that I was weak, and that our history meant nothing. It wasn't about the money for her, not really. It was about power. She wanted to prove that she could take me, that she could beat me at my own game. The irony is, by trying to break the contract, she ended up enforcing its most fundamental principle, that actions have consequences. And what about me? I'm still a divorce lawyer, but something has changed. I look at my clients differently now. I see the pain behind their anger, the fear behind their greed. I'm more patient, perhaps a little wiser. My own journey through the fire has tempered me. My firm is more successful than ever. My victory over Thorne has only enhanced my reputation as a strategist, the man you hire when the stakes are highest. But the victory feels hollow. Winning a war against the person you promised to love for the rest of your life isn't a victory. It's just a tragedy with a better settlement agreement. The unbreakable agreement is still a case study at Harvard. Professor Caldwell sent me a note after he heard what happened. He just wrote, "A contract is a story about the future. I'm sorry, your story had to end this way, but I am damn proud of the architecture." I keep that note on my desk. It reminds me that you can build the most perfect, logical, impenetrable fortress in the world, but you can still end up alone inside it. So here's what I want to leave you with. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. But even then, what I truly fought for wasn't just my assets or my reputation. I fought for a principle. The principle that promises matter. That a signature on a piece of paper is a bond. And that when someone tries to burn down the world you built together, you have every right to use the tools at your disposal to protect yourself. But you should also know that there's a cost. You might win the battle, but the peace you find afterward is a different kind of peace. It's quieter. It's lonelier. But it is, for the first time in a long time, truly and completely your own. Thank you for listening to my story. It's not a happy one, but it's a real one. If you've been through something similar, if you've ever had to fight for what's yours against someone you once loved, know that you're not alone. Hit the like button if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories about life, love, and the consequences of our choices. And please, share your own experiences in the comments below. Reading them helps more than you know. It reminds all of us that even in the toughest times we can find the strength to rebuild.